Hello everyone, today we are going to present you a paper called The Effect of Aid on Growth, Evidence from a Quasi-Experiment. The paper was written by Sebastian Galliani, Stefan Nack, Alexin Colling-Su, and Van Zhou, and the presentation is prepared by Adina Amirgaliyeva and Aidarova. Here is a quick outline of what we are going to focus on today. We are going to talk about the research question, relevance of the topic, methodology, main findings, and further checks and conclusion. So the research question of the project is whether there is an effect of aid on economic growth in recipient countries.
The question is important and relevant as there is no agreed answer to the question if aid in recipient countries leads to the economic growth. And there was no instrumental variable to test the hypothesis that aid strictly causes the growth. So this paper, in this paper, authors instrumented the generous aid variable in an economic growth equation and used this new instrument to analyze the causal effect of aid on growth in recipient countries. An important part of the discussion is the income threshold level set by the International Development Association in 1987. It's used to decide on allocation of resources. Throughout the time, it was adjusted only for inflation and changed from $580 in 1987 to $1,175 in 2010. Another criteria is lack of creditworthiness, in other words, inability to hand new external debt at market interest rates in a long term. It's important to note that IDA threshold is also used by other donors such as African Development Bank and Asian Development Bank. So using an equation 1 where the dependent variable is 8J is minus 1 and independent variable is crossing in period s minus 2. If crossing s minus 2 is equal to 1 if a country has crossed the first threshold at least 2 periods before s, and otherwise it's equal to 10. So using this equation, it was found out that total aid to GNA ratio drops by 59% on average when threshold level is crossed.
So the data is taken from two main sources. Income, investment, economic growth, and other country characteristics are from the World Bank's World Development Indicators. Aid data is obtained from the OECD's Development Assistance Committee. And like in the previous literature, aid is measured by total net official development assistance payments as a share of GNI in current US dollars. The authors identified 35 countries that crossed the IDA income threshold from below between 1987 and 2010. So here we can see the year they crossed this IDA threshold and the year they graduated from the IDA. Because IDA has a 3-year replenishment cycle, we group years into 8 3-year periods. And this is a natural way of grouping the data because donors usually make contributions for each replenishment period rather than annually. Okay, now we can move on to the model. The authors postulated the following model in order to test the null hypothesis. And the null hypothesis is aid doesn't affect growth. So here we can see the regression model where the dependent variable is growth. And growth here is the average log difference of real GDP per capita of country I in period S. Y here is the log of real per capita GDP. 8IS minus 1 is the log of average aid received by country I as a share of GNI in the previous period. Xi here is a column vector of time-varying variables, including log population. Lambda I is the country I fixed effect, such as the quality of the government, and tau S minus 1 is the period S fixed effect that takes into account any time-specific shocks that affect all countries. As the fixed effect model could be biased, another model is presented. And to get this model, we need to first difference model of the fixed effect. And here, country-specific effects are eliminated. Throughout the paper, authors use both these models to describe their findings to get the results.
Okay, so in the results sections, both OLS and instrumental variables estimates were presented, and notably, instrumental variable estimates are robust and larger than OLS ones. In columns 1 and 2, OLS estimates are calculated without aid instrumenting. So 1% increase in A to GNA ratio leads to 0.011 percentage increase in per capita GDP growth, as it can be seen on column 1, and to 0.013 percentage increase in per capita GDP growth in column 2. So the difference here is that in column 2, first difference equation was used. In columns 3 to 7, two CLS models was used, and coefficients when 1% increase in A to GNA ratio takes place are presented in the first row as 0.028, 0.035, and so on by columns. In columns 5 to 7, equation 3 was used, while equation 2 reports are given in columns 3 to 5. The difference between those columns is in instrumental variables such as crossing based on predicted per capita GNI from the smoothing exercise in column 4, or in column 3, it's crossing 2 periods earlier. Overall, instrumental variable estimates are robust and consistently larger than OLS, implying a strong positive correlation of aid with real economic growth. Here in table 4, it's represented that estimates where initial income was also instrumented. In this case, results show that error terms in the equation are serially uncorrelated and estimates are notably large and similar to the ones discussed before. So 1% rise in A to GNA ratio from its average value at the crossing period leads to 0.35 percentage increase in the growth rate.
Okay, so here are some important factors that the authors paid attention to. The first one is that aid is likely to be measured with error and aid to GNI ratio as well, because there is a possibility that not all donors report their aid to the DAC in all years. Another problem that could potentially bias the results is that some countries could manipulate their income level to continue receiving their aid. And even though authors think that endogenous manipulation of the income level is highly unlikely, they still tested for evidence of data manipulation. So in the next slide, we can see the histogram that shows the distance between a country's current GNI per capita and the current IDA threshold. And all eligible countries from the period of 1987 to 2010 were included. Here we group country year observation in $100 bins according to the distance between the income level and the current IDA threshold. So according to the authors, if the governments understated their GNI to stay below the IDA threshold, we should observe the bin just to the left of the threshold to be abnormally high relative to the neighboring bins. As shown in this figure, there is no visual evidence that countries bunch right below the IDA threshold. Also, a series of robustness tests were done. Here, the authors tested whether other time-varying factors could be confounding the effect of aid on growth. They added to the baseline of a regression a set of economic and political variables like primary school enrollment rate, a dummy for a banking crisis, inflation, and so on. However, the aid coefficients remained robust. And another finding by the authors is that in the short run, aid fosters physical investment.
To conclude, findings suggest positive impact of aid on growth. The estimates are based on a relatively small group of countries, but they may be generalized to countries that are still under IDA threshold as they grow closer to this threshold. And there is an evidence that aid is also likely to increase the investment rate. It was also presented. So thank you for your attention.